Evening and welcome to the John F. Kennedy School of Government at Harvard University. We're honored and fortunate indeed to have back with us this evening one of this country's most prominent labor leaders and human rights advocates, Cesar Chavez. Few individuals in my lifetime have served the twin causes of worker rights and minority empowerment with such passion and dedication as Mr. Chavez. The Kennedy School aspires to train leaders who are inspired with commitment to the public service, and Cesar Chavez is a vibrant symbol of the extraordinary impact that one individual can have in public affairs. Cesar Chavez worked closely with Bobby Kennedy, who, as many of you will know, was one of the central forces in the creation of our Institute of Politics at the school. And it's therefore especially appropriate that we should have with us this evening to introduce this evening's activities Carrie Kennedy, Bobby Kennedy's daughter, a graduate of Brown University and of the Boston College Law School. Carrie is the founder and executive director of the Robert F. Kennedy Memorial Center for Human Rights. Carrie?
Thank you. Before I introduce Cesar, we're going to show a film called The Wrath of Grapes, which I think will introduce you to him in another way. So here's the film. Thanks. commemorating the Catholic celebration of Ash Wednesday, the beginning of Lent, and the great fast of our Lord. I remember that day in 1988 when Cesar Chavez ended his 36-day fast. He ate bread, as we Catholics do at Mass, to celebrate the memory of Christ's Last Supper. And that is how the fast should have been broken, because Jesus Christ would not eat California grapes today. It is a very special privilege for me to join Cesar and all of you this evening. No one in my family can forget how much Cesar's courage and love of justice meant to Robert Kennedy. The people whom Cesar represents are the people Robert Kennedy wanted to represent. When he stood beside Cesar, he knew he stood with a figure of greatness. Cesar Chavez has endured 3 great fasts. He organized farm workers when the world said it was impossible and the growers reacted with malice. Cesar Chavez succeeded when others could not, because he has a special quality. Each generation produces a few such people. They awaken in each of us a vision of what we, as a people, can achieve. I am proud to stand with a man whose words and actions have opened our eyes and our hearts. People with this quality are precious to all of us, and we cannot afford to lose them. The world cannot ignore Cesar's sacrifice. The growers cannot overlook his suffering, and politicians must heed his warning. Humanity always and everywhere shall be moved to action by a man who risks his life so that others might live. When I visited Cesar on the 19th day of his fast, I was shocked to see his suffering. With my brother and my sister, we begged him to eat. It's not a fast, he said, unless you suffer. And when I saw his suffering, it forced the question we should always be asking when we see injustice. Why? Why does he have to suffer? Cesar's answer was clear. He suffered because the women, the men, and the children who picked the grapes in the San Joaquin Valley suffer too. They suffer from one of the nation's highest cancer rates. They suffer miscarriages and birth defects. They suffer because of pesticides. They suffer because of greed. These are the people, our brothers and sisters, who harvest our daily bread. With their hands, as poor and as oppressed as they are, they feed this nation. And this nation suffers a scar on its soul when we poison with pesticides the hands that feed us. These workers have a right to live, as well as a right to work. They give the growers their sweat, but they do not owe them their lives. The day is coming soon when the poison of California grapes will no longer be washed by the tears and the blood of the workers in the field. When the 36-day fast began, Cesar explained that its first and foremost aim was the purification of his own body, mind, and soul. But if Cesar should feel a need to seek purification, what about the rest of us? No one has worked harder or accomplished more for the farm workers than Cesar Chavez. When we asked Cesar if there was anything we could do, he said, yes, there is something you can do. Boycott grapes. If Cesar Chavez can go for 36 days without eating, the American people can do without poisoned grapes. If Cesar Chavez can risk his life so that farm workers can live, then the American people can insist that these workers come back from their fields alive. What little effort it takes to perform these modest acts of justice, and what great power we can bring to Caesar and the United Farm Workers as the boycott continues to spread from the Pacific to the Atlantic. My family will never forget the effect that Caesar's suffering and the suffering of the farm workers had on Robert Kennedy. When he was in Delano 23 years ago, my father addressed a crowd of farm workers. And he said that when you are old and your back is bent from years in the fields, you'll look up and you'll see your grandchildren on their way to school. And you'll know how proud they are that you can say, I was there, I marched with Caesar. I look up now, and I too am proud and moved, knowing that I have the privilege to say, my father walked with Caesar. And now it is a great honor for me to introduce Cesar Chavez. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. Carrie, thank you very much. Dean Potman, brothers and sisters, we're especially happy to be here at this school this evening, and also happy to have met a number of my brothers and sisters in the trade union program that are here tonight. The topic of the talk tonight is policy versus public solutions for the safety of farm workers and the food we all eat. The Great Boycott is one way we think that safety can come about. The Great Boycott, as you know, is being conducted by the Farm Workers Union and millions of Americans and Canadians and other people in other parts of the world who are joining with us, as they've done on 2 previous occasions, to cut the sale of grapes enough so that the California table grape growers will want to sit down and talk to us, bargain with us, and to do something about the issue of pesticides. You'll recall that our first boycott in 1965 was one after 5 years, but one of the demands that we had there was the demand in those days asking the grape growers to eliminate the use of DDT and DDE and the other related poisons. And I recall well when the demand was made, the growers told us that they couldn't because it was impossible for them to grow one single grape without DDT. The people who counseled us told us that that wasn't so, and we insisted because at that time, you will recall that we had heard from Rachel Carson and the terrible tragedies and problems that DDT was causing. And so we're on the boycott. And by 1970, 5 years later, 17.5 million Americans were boycotting grapes. The growers were just too happy to sit with us and ban the use of DDT 2 years before our own government banned the use of DDT throughout the country. And so today, on the organophosphates, we know we can do the same thing. In the Great San Joaquin Valley, the largest, the most, the wealthiest agricultural area in the world, there are cancer clusters in these communities surrounded by vineyards and cotton fields and other agricultural products. These cancer clusters come because of the unregulated use of cancer-causing pesticides that are used and have been used for many years now, that are wrecking not only the lives of the workers and their families, but the environment, the water, the soil, and so forth. hardly a day goes by that we do not get a report that a worker has been poisoned. Every so often, like 2.5 weeks ago, we get a report that a worker dies from the use of pesticides. When that happens because of the publicity of the boycott, because of the fast, and because now there's great awareness of the dangers of pesticides, the local authorities go into a very great panic. For instance, when the 25-year-old farm worker died, an autopsy was done on the body, and today, this is 3.5 weeks ago, about 3 weeks ago, we still don't know the cause of death. Well, we know the cause of death, but officially it has not been reported what the cause of death was, except that the first report came out saying that it was a great mystery, the death of his worker, because he was supposed to have been fully protected. He had all the things that the law requires for protection, including the garments and the mask and the respirator and everything, yet he died. Worst of all is the impact of the pesticides on the children. In McFarland, as you saw in the video, the rate of cancer is 800% higher than the national average. The video was made 3.5 years ago, is now outdated, because now in McFarland, in Early Mart, 14 miles north of McFarland, we discovered another cancer cluster where the incidence among children, cancer, is 1,200% above the national average. We have visited with those children, with the families, and we know too well from seeing them the agony and the slow, painful death and the great fear that exists in those communities about, as you saw in the video, where's it going to strike next? I'm about to have a baby, and is the baby going to be born complete without any defects? Table grapes is the largest food crop in California. It employs about 80,000 jobs and about 50 or a little less than 50,000 workers, mostly in California, a little bit in Arizona. 10 million pounds of pesticides are used, mostly organophosphates, on grapes every year. That's about 5,000 tons of pesticides on those grapes. There are more than 75 types of pesticides used, and according to the government, U.S. government accounting office, 34 of those 76 legal pesticides cause cancer and some birth defects. But we really don't know all the hazards of these pesticides because EPA has not yet finished doing the study on those pesticides, and we're told by estimates by the GAO that it's going to take EPA probably to the year 2200 before they catch up and they have every single pesticide analyzed to find out the real impact of those pesticides on the environment and human life. We maintain that there are no safe pesticides because the sole purpose of a pesticide is to kill living things. And while the growers may not recognize this, we maintain that workers and their families and consumers are living things. And that the use of pesticides in grapes, as an example, or the reported poisonings and damage to workers in table grapes in California is 52% of all of the poisonings in every other crop combined in California. In other words, more poisons are reported in grapes than all the other crops combined in California. We're confronted with a very difficult problem with drift. A lot of pesticides are sprayed by airplane, helicopter, and are sprayed by tractor, some, and so that as the wind picks up the pesticides, and they drift sometimes for as much as 40 miles. And so pesticides are everywhere. We have tested the soil in those small communities. It's in the fields. It's in the roadways. It's in the parks, in the schoolyards, in front of the city halls. It's everywhere. The constant exposure of those people to those pesticides, we think, link the high incidence of cancer and miscarriages and birth defects and even death. Because the testing is inadequate, we really cannot assure the safety of the workers and also know exactly what is the impact of the pesticide residue on the consumers as they ingest the food that contains those residues. Again, the Government Accounting Office states that the present testing methods, the multi-residue testing methods that are used today, are not adequate enough to really find out the residue levels in the various fruits and vegetables as they come to the marketplace. Not only that, but the tolerance levels, which is a big disappointment to us by EPA, that they set these tolerance levels out of thin air, that they really don't have the data to medically give us the tolerance levels that make sense, and that we know also that they use the risk to the people and to the environment, and also they take into account the benefits to the growers, and then they combine two and make a decision. So that if a certain pesticide is going to cause one cancer per 100,000 lives, they may very well up the tolerance level, so it may be two cancers per 100,000 lives, because to do that, and if you increase the tolerance level, then they can use more of the same pesticide or other pesticides. So there's this juggling that is done by EPA, which we think it's immoral and shouldn't happen. And we know EPA has insufficient data. EPA and the Food and Drug Administration admit that tolerance levels are inadequate. We've been campaigning against pesticides since 1958. In those early days when we mentioned pesticides and we got people to look at us and they didn't understand what we're talking about. In these 30-some years, we have not seen one state legislature, not one Congress, not one governor, not one president that has been able to do anything to bring about public policy to really deal with the issue of pesticides. And today, we don't think it's going to happen in the near future. And so we feel that there are other ways to deal with such issues as peace and the environment, other in politics. We think there are other solutions to deal with the issue of the homeless and the poor and the minorities and racism and sexism and so forth. You see, the have-nots, the vote of the have-nots does not count as much as the vote of those who have something. And it seems that the more you own, the more your vote counts. And the less you have, the less your vote counts. We have a mentality in our nation, it's been there for a long time, is that we want quick fixes. Everything should happen quickly and effortlessly. For instance, that there are solutions, if you make a law, pass a law, that ends a problem. But we know it doesn't. And look at the many laws that have been passed to deal with the drug problem, and the laws that have been passed to deal with crime, and the laws that have been passed to deal with sexism or racism or with exploitation and poverty, and we still have them. That we really cannot hope to have quick solutions like we have instant coffee for those problems. There are other methods we feel that need to be explored. In our own time, we have experimented with them, and we have found, in fact, to us, who are surrounded in our efforts to bring about decency and justice to these people, we're surrounded by super powerful forces. The workers don't have the vote. Many of them are not citizens. Most of them don't speak the language. They're new immigrants in many places. They're migratory. We have in those small communities are controlled by the people who own the land. You see, land ownership is different than, there's something about land ownership that's different than like owning a factory. And I can't quite put my finger on that, but if you own land, and we get a good picture of what happens like in Central America and in other places of the world, you own land, you own a lot of things. More power, the ownership of land, than owning a business or a factory, it seems. And so that everything in those communities are owned and controlled. Give you an example. The video you saw today, 2 weeks ago we got an injunction. We're not to show this video by court order of the Kern County Superior Court. And so we're going back to and so the boycott becomes an instrument for us. We've learned an awful lot from Gandhi. We've learned from Dr. King, and we learned with almost 30 years of boycotting ourselves. We've come to understand and learn quite a bit about boycotts. We don't know intimately how they work, because it's a human process that is difficult to describe. But they do work. That they work, they do. And so it's through the boycott. That is, by voting at the marketplace, that those of us who don't have the franchise, don't have the votes, those of us who don't have the money, who don't own things, can hope to remedy some of these injustices. You have heard that politics creates strange bedfellows. We say that boycotts create stranger bedfellows still. To give you an example, in the marketplace, the negotiations between the brokers, the buyers of grapes for the large supermarkets, and the growers they're constantly negotiating. The grower wants to sell all of his grapes to FOB, Freight on Board, because of his cash flow and because they know what they get right now. They get their money. And the supermarkets would love to buy the grapes on consignment. And there's no way that the supermarkets can buy the grapes on consignment unless when a boycott happens to come. Because the growers have enormous cold storage facilities to keep the grapes there, even though they have to spray grapes with sulfites once every 7 days to keep the grapes looking fresh. But even with that, they can control the market. When a boycott comes into place and we begin to have just the beginning of an impact at the marketplace, now the negotiations turn. Now the supermarkets, now the grape buyers can now bargain better with the growers, and they can now get the grapes on consignment, which means that the growers aren't getting that much. The boycott works not because we stop all the sales, but they work because we stop a little bit of the sales. For instance, in our biggest boycotts that we've had, we've won when we're able to get between 7.5% and 9% of the people buying grapes in the country. That much. And in Canada, the two big countries where we do the boycotts, that much is enough to win the boycott. So if we were trying to win to get justice from the growers through the political process, Well, you know, it would be all over. We'd have to win because on a certain Tuesday at 7 o'clock in the evening, it'd be all over. And we have to win with a majority. The difference of the boycott is that there is no time limit, and we can win with a very small percentage. And it's at the marketplace where we invite people to come and look at the marketplace to understand that there are no quick fixes for the problems that we have and has been with us for years and years, and that there's got to be other ways for those who the vote doesn't really work for them. You know how many people today don't want to vote? We invented voter registration. Back in 1946, I started doing voter registration in the Hispanic communities in California and in Arizona. And we registered in the days when they would not anything to, they didn't want to vote. We have suffered all kinds of insults trying to get people to go vote. That changed. What hasn't changed is that the poor are still poor. They're still homeless. And less and less people are interested about voting today. I'm talking about the ones that have very little, because it seems that the way things work, the one who has the least is where the vote counts the least. And so we're boycotting grapes, but we're not boycotting wine, and we're not boycotting raisins. There are three separate industries, and although all of the grapes, raisins, and wines do use pesticides, not as much as fresh grapes. Also, we don't have the resources to boycott the two other parts of that industry, so that we concentrate on grapes, and we ask you to boycott, if you agree with our program, to boycott all the grapes, the green grapes, and to boycott the red grapes and the black grapes, and the white grapes, and even, or anything that looks like a grape, to be sure. We have seen and we have read some dramatic transformations that come from boycotts. And we believe in boycotts. And we believe that boycotts is the way to vote at the marketplace, because you can't coerce people. It's got to be their own decision. And a vote at the marketplace has tremendous impact. One vote truly counts at the marketplace. So we invite you to join with us, not only for the workers, not only for their children, but also for your own health, because you see, you are eating and continue to eat, and most of the food we eat in this country today have residues. Now, there's never been any study made to know exactly the impact of residue on human beings, on consumers. But if we're just sensible, we know that if you're eating poison, somewhere, somehow, something's going to happen to your health. Thank you very much.
Mr. Chavez is going to now take questions from the audience. Following our convention here, will you step to the microphones on one side of the room or the other, or in the balcony, and I'll recognize you, and then he'll respond. Yes.
Hello. Here at the School of Government, the thought of speaking economically through the marketplace rings very soundly. This is something that we study a lot here. But what I'm interested in is that I've heard that there are, in California now, citizen-based initiatives coming up on the ballot designed to limit pesticide use. And I was wondering if you could comment on, A, whether these initiatives help to achieve your goals, and B, whether they're winnable.
Well, let me tell you, we had an initiative 2 years ago, 70, I think it was 75. The initiative was put in the ballot, but it was very weak because the proponents felt that it was a real strong initiative, wouldn't pass. So they weakened it. It passed. Nothing happened. Nothing really happened. We'll I'm talking about initiatives. There's a very strong initiative in California on auto insurance. Nothing's happened yet. And you see, the marketplace would have been, I think, directer and quicker, especially in auto insurance. A boycott would have been quicker and faster. Because you know there's been boycotts. For instance, instantaneous boycotts like a coffee and the meat boycotts. There were one like in a week. And the price of coffee was going crazy 10 years ago. And the consuming public just got up and said, we're not going to pay the price for coffee. Coffee's behaved since then.
Let me come back. Yes. First of all, I just want to say thank you for your sober and thoughtful presentation. I would like to know first of all, I'm not sure, I'd like to know when this most recent round first began. How long have you been organizing this campaign? What kind of success are you beginning to see? And specifically, what's been happening in the Boston area?
We announced the boycott in '84. '84 was an election year, and the Olympics were going on, so we just announced it. And then in the middle of '86, we began to put the staff out in the field. Boston is big good because you see, I should tell you that probably of most areas, with maybe San Francisco, maybe Seattle, maybe Toronto, would equal. But in Boston, we've had some terrific support for many, many years. So at the cutback in Boston, you need to help me. What was the 22% cutback in the sales of grapes in Boston, which is probably the highest in the country. But that's Boston. That's not the whole country. Los Angeles, the sales went up 9%. And in San Francisco, they went down. All total, we're doing well. We estimate that we're around 6%. We estimate we have probably 12 to 15 million people boycotting now. And we need to get up to about 18 or 20 million.
Yes, up in the balcony.
We're currently in Massachusetts involved in a struggle to define legally what organic means, what IPM means, what transitional agriculture means, and then also to define to see how that plays out in the marketplace and what the consumer, how the consumer starts to vote on these issues about what they want and what they don't want in their foods. And specifically, the two lines that we're pursuing, or two strategies that we're looking at, one being the testing method and one being the growing method. Do you tell the consumer, do you want the labeling on the produce that is sold in the marketplace to say this is how the produce is grown, or do you want it to say this was tested at this level? Now, given the fact that EPA can only test, and Massachusetts only has the capability of looking at maybe less than 50% of the residues that may potentially be on any foods, and the fact that the testing levels aren't as our science is limited as far as being able to tell or at least detect the pesticide levels. What is your comment? How do you comment on that, considering that there are all of these private laboratories growing, springing up, wanting to do the testing, and that consumers, for the most part, or not for the most part, but they're a large part of, there's a large cry for knowing exactly what the testing levels are. How do you resolve that?
Well, you see, the problem is not at the testing or at the growing. The problem is the state legislatures, because organic can mean anything the legislature wanted to mean. Like in California, the word organic no longer means what you and I may think it meant or it should mean. Now in California, the industry came in, and now organic, you can have a little bit of pesticides and still call it organic. So it's at that level. Is at the you see, once the public begins to understand organic as the thing to do for health and so forth, then the industry comes and gets legislatures to then amend the meaning of organic. And so what have you got?
Yes, sir. I'm wondering if you favor the transformation of the whole agricultural economy to an organic type of system. And can I just follow up saying that, as we know in the Massachusetts area, if you just go to some of the extremely high-priced health food stores here that maybe 20% have organic produce, that it's really caters to an exclusive population, and that the majority of the poor people and middle class could never afford such an endeavor. Please comment. Thank you.
It's not what I favor. Is that we're going to be forced to get away from pesticides, because at some point the overuse of pesticides are going to have a not only an impact on the workforce and on the environment, but on the consumers directly. And when that happens and the consumer gets up and says, I don't want any more poisons in my food, when that happens, the next day you're going to have safe food. You see, the demand has to be made because it can be done now. It could be, well, there are some people doing organic agriculture today, and it can happen. But it's,
excuse me, I mean, are you suggesting that we could transform our entire economy in the foreseeable future so that we could actually do away with pesticides? That's another
what I'm
issue.
saying is, it's at the market. If there's a market for it, it'll happen pretty quickly. See, once the consuming public begins to demand clean food, the issue is not whether we can or not, or whether we need to transform agriculture and into organic agriculture. That's not the issue. The issue is the marketplace. If there's a demand out there, you'll get the food you want.
Yes, up here,
Mr. Chavette, I am one of your demonstrators from 23 years ago.
Viva.
The demonstration that we participated in, myself and my 5 children, was a reverse kind of demonstration. Purity Supreme at that time boycotted all of the grapes, and we went to a Purity Supreme market and marched around to say thank you to Purity Supreme. And I think instead of emphasizing a lot of the negatives, I think we could even increase our percentages more in Boston if we ask where the grapes are coming from, because all of us purchase foods, and then when we find out where they come from, say that we are against those that have come from California because of the use of insecticides or pesticides. And if they do not purchase those grapes, I think we should say thank you. And I think that's a rewarded behavior is repeated behavior. And I think if you tell the people that are purchasing grapes and they don't purchase them, that you think that is a good thing, they will continue that and they will not purchase them. Okay.
That's right. We'll be starting a campaign here pretty soon, going to the stores and being more visible with the picket lines and the leafleting and so forth. And we'll be getting a hold of you again.
Yes.
Is it true that a lot of times when pesticides are outlawed in this country or banned in this country, that the chemical companies turn around and import them to third world countries, export them to third world countries, where they're again imported back here, and we end up eating them again?
We know of one example. When DDT was banned in this country, they continued making DDT here for, well, just about 3 years ago. And all of it was sold in other countries, but it was still made here. And the last plant, DDT plant, was closed about 2-3 years ago. In the meantime, we had some large strikes along the border, and we used to picket the border to keep the people from across the border coming to break our strikes. And everything comes across the border from midnight on. I mean, not only gold and diamonds and tobacco and liquor, but also pesticides come across.
Yes.
Buenas noches, Cesar.
Buenas noches.
I'm a senior here at Harvard, and right now I'm holding in my arms Saul Alinsky's biography, the last one that just came out. And you spoke a little bit about your voter registration drives in the 40s. And as one who's interested in community organizing, and as I know that a lot of us are wondering, how it is that a person sort of takes on the road to becoming a community organizer. Could you speak a little bit about sort of your beginnings as an organizer?
Gosh, such a long time ago. 40 some years ago. Well, like you and many others, we wanted something had to be done, and we believed that organization was what to do. And I was very lucky, extremely lucky. A man named Fred Ross, who was probably the greatest community organizer has ever lived. I worked under him for Sololinsky, but under Fred Ross, and I learned. I worked 15 years with him, and then after that learning period, I left community organization and came to do union organizing, and I used pretty much the same approach, and it worked. By the time we got to organizing farm workers, there had been almost 100 years of attempts to organize farm workers, and every single attempt had been defeated, and everyone had been there. The Wobblies came, and the Socialists, the Communists, the FLCO, the CIO, everybody, and they couldn't do it. We came in, and we were part of those strikers back in the 40s and the 50s. We came in early 60, and we knew quite a bit. We went around and asked a lot of questions and found out that there were certain things we had to do. One was that we didn't have the money to organize, and so we said, okay, money should not be a reason for not organizing. And we then set up the volunteer corps, and we're still all volunteers in the union. And then we knew that violence was the greatest weapon the growers had against us, was to commit some kind of violence and use that as an excuse to terminate the movement. And so we decided we should be nonviolent. And then we knew strikes couldn't be won, or most couldn't be won. So then we looked around and said, oh, the boycott. And so that's the boycott. And we changed those three. Those were the innovations that we put into farm labor, and we were successful.
We're very grateful for this opportunity to hear a bit of our nation's history. We're grateful to you, Cesar Chavez, for coming to this evening.
Thank you.
And